The cold in the Boston courthouse wasn't just a matter of temperature, it was an atmosphere. Centuries old. Soaked into the mahogany benches and the limestone walls. I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the kind that creak just enough to announce your arrival, and stepped inside. I was wearing a suit I'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago for job interviews. The fabric, thin against the chill. But my spine was steel. My parents, Gregory and Sandra, were already seated in the front row. They looked impeccable in bespoke Italian wool. The kind of clothes that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. My brother, Matthew, sat next to them, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. When I walked in, they didn't look worried or angry. They just exchanged a look of profound exhaustion and rolled their eyes. It was a synchronized movement, practiced over decades. The eye roll that said, "Here comes Haley." The tedious interruption to our otherwise important lives. Mr. Vance, their attorney, checked his Rolex. A flash of gold in the dim light. He looked at me like I was a clerical error he had to correct before lunch. I walked to the defendant's table and set down my briefcase. I pulled out 3 folders. Red, blue, and black. Color-coded. Precise. They thought I was scared. They thought I was the same quiet girl who lived in their attic. I caught my reflection in the polished wood of the table. I wasn't scared. I was ready. Before the gavel drops. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community, to understand why I was standing there, facing down my own family in a court of law. You have to understand the house. The crumbling Victorian mansion on Beacon Hill, where we grew up. From the outside, it was a postcard of old Boston charm brick sidewalks, gas lamps, ivy climbing the brick facade. Inside, it was a drafty mausoleum of faded glory. The house was divided, not just by walls, but by worth. Matthew occupied the master suites on the 2nd floor. His rooms were always warm, filled with the latest gaming consoles, then the latest tech for his startups, then the finest suits for his meetings. He was the sun, burning bright and hot, consuming all the oxygen and resources in the room. I lived in the attic. Literally. It was the retrofitted servants' quarters, reachable only by a narrow back staircase that smelled of cedar and neglect. In the winter, I could see my breath. In the summer, it was a kiln. My parents called it cozy. I called it what it was, storage. I was the shadow to Matthew's sun, useful only for fixing what he broke, for cleaning up his messes, for being the silent, steady background noise to his brilliant, chaotic symphony. Haley, be a dear and fix the Wi-Fi, my mother would say without looking up from her society magazines. Haley, run these contracts to the post office, my father would command, handing me a stack of papers for one of Matthew's doomed ventures. I did it. I always did it. Not because I was weak, but because I was watching. My frugality. Born of necessity, because they gave me no allowance, while Matthew burned through thousands. Became their favorite joke. Haley's hoarding again. My mother would laugh when I saved leftover catering food. She's so antisocial. My father would sigh when I spent Friday nights in the attic instead of at galas I wasn't invited to. They painted my discipline as a defect, my quietness as a pathology. Only Grandpa Silas saw the truth. He was my father's father, the man who had actually built the fortune they were so busy spending. He'd sit in his library, the only room in the house that felt real, and watch me. He didn't give me money. He knew my parents would just take it, claiming it was for room and board. Instead, he gave me books, biographies of generals, treatises on contract law, histories of economic collapse, grit. Haley, he told me once, his voice raspy with age and whiskey. Charm is a depreciating asset. Grit compounds. You let them laugh. You let them underestimate you. It's the greatest advantage you'll ever have. For years, I thought my silence was submission. I thought I was just taking it because I had nowhere else to go. But looking back, I realize it wasn't weakness. It was architecture. I was building a fortress of silence. Inside that attic. Under the guise of being antisocial. I wasn't hiding. I was studying. I was preparing. I was waiting for the moment when the sun would burn itself out, and the shadow would be the only thing left standing. Grandpa Silas died 2 weeks ago. The funeral was a pageant of black silk and crocodile tears. My parents wept for the cameras. Matthew looked solemn and handsome, accepting condolences like he was accepting awards. I stood in the back, dry-eyed. I had said my goodbyes to Silas years ago. In the quiet of the library. Then came the reading of the will. We gathered in Mr. Vance's plush office. My parents expected the bulk of the estate. Matthew expected the liquid assets to fund his latest crypto exchange venture. I expected nothing. Maybe a few books. Mr. Vance read the terms with a frown, as if the words tasted sour. The house went to my father, but with a caveat: it couldn't be sold for 10 years. The remaining liquid assets, $2.5 million, were left to me, solely, to Haley Reed. The silence in that room was absolute. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bomb taking a breath before detonation. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide, not with love, but with calculation. My father turned a shade of purple I'd never seen. Matthew just laughed. A short, sharp bark. Good one, he said. That's a typo. Right. It wasn't a typo. And 2 weeks later, the ambush came. We need to have a family meeting, my mother said, her voice dripping with that artificial sweetness she used when she wanted to manipulate a waiter. In the drawing room, 2 p.m. I walked in to find them, arranged like a tribunal. My parents on the velvet sofa. Matthew, leaning casually against the mantelpiece. And Mr. Vance, sitting in the wingback chair. A stack of documents on his lap. Haley, sit down, my father said. It wasn't an invitation. I sat on the edge of the ottoman, keeping my back straight. We're worried about you, my mother began. This inheritance. It's a lot of pressure. And given your history. My history, I asked. My voice sounded calm, even to my own ears. Your isolation, she said, ticking points off on her fingers. Your obsessive saving. The way you hoard food. The way you lock yourself in that attic for days. We've been speaking with Dr. Eris. And he agrees, these are signs of deep-seated instability. Paranoia. Perhaps. Or a manic compulsion. I stared at her. They were taking my survival mechanisms, the frugality I needed to eat, the studying I needed to escape, and twisting them into a diagnosis. They were weaponizing my competence to paint me as crazy. We've drawn up a family management plan, Mr. Vance said, sliding the documents across the coffee table. It's a conservatorship, essentially. Your parents will oversee the trust. They'll invest it. Ensure it's safe. You'll receive a monthly stipend of $3,500. That's more than you make as a paralegal. It's generous. $3,500. Enough to rent a nice apartment, buy some clothes, and keep my mouth shut. While they drained the $2.5 million to fund their lifestyle and Matthew's failures. And if I refuse, I asked. Matthew stepped forward, his charm dropping like a mask. Don't be selfish. Haley, you're not equipped for this. You're fragile. If you force us to go to court, it'll all come out. The hoarding, the antisocial behavior. We'll have to testify about your mental state. It will be public. It will be humiliating. You'll never work in this town again. You have 72 hours to sign, Mr. Vance said, checking his watch again. Or we file the petition for competency. I looked at them. My mother, with her feigned concern. My father, with his entitlement. Matthew, with his greed. They didn't see a person. They saw a piggy bank they needed to smash open. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to understand. I stood up. I picked up the unsigned papers. "I'll think about it," I said. I walked out of the room. I walked up the back stairs to the attic. The moment I closed the door and locked it, the trembling stopped. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt cold. Absolute zero. I went to the heavy, fireproof, safe bolt gunned to the floor of my closet, the one Grandpa Silas had bought for me when I turned 18. I spun the dial. Inside, there was no money, just a single, thick binder. Grandpa Silas had labeled it the poison pill. I opened it. I turned to the section marked "In Case of Wolves," and I began to read. I had 72 hours. I wouldn't need that long. I waited until the house was asleep. The old Victorian groaned in the wind, settling into its decay. I crept down the back stairs. Not to flee, but to work. My job as a paralegal at a mid-sized corporate law firm wasn't glamorous. My parents thought I filed papers and made coffee. They didn't know I had access to LexisNexis, property databases, and credit bureaus. They didn't know that for the past 4 years, while they thought I was hiding in the attic, I was attending law school at night. I hadn't told them because I knew they would sabotage it. I passed the bar exam 6 months ago under my full legal name, Haley Silas Reed, a name they never used. To them, I was just Haley. I sat at the dining room table, the moonlight spilling over my laptop. I needed to know why. Why now? Why were they so desperate? $2.5 million was a lot of money. But they lived in a $3 million house. They drove Porsches. They vacationed in Gstaad. Why risk a public court battle for cash they shouldn't need? I started with the house, the ancestral seat of the Reed family. I pulled the property records. My breath hitched. Mortgage 1, paid off in 1998. Mortgage 2, taken out 5 years ago, $1.2 million. Mortgage 3, taken out last year, a high-interest private loan, $800,000. The house wasn't an asset. It was a liability. They had stripped every ounce of equity out of the walls. They were drowning in debt. I dug deeper. Credit cards. Maxed out. My father's consulting firm, dissolved by the state for failure to pay taxes 2 years ago. My mother's charity foundation empty. The eye roll in the courtroom. The arrogance. The bespoke suits. It wasn't confidence. It was a costume. It was the desperate armor of people who had nothing left but their image. If they stopped looking rich, they would cease to exist. They needed my trust fund not to invest, not to protect me, but to pay the vigorish on loans they never should have taken. But the math still didn't add up. $2 million in debt was bad. But it was manageable if they sold the house. Why the conservatorship? Why the nuclear option? Then I saw it. A series of transfers. Small at first, then escalating. From my parents' retirement accounts, from the equity line, all flowing into one place, Titanium Ledger LLC. I ran a search on Titanium Ledger. It was a shell company registered in the Caymans. The signatory, Matthew Reed. I cross-referenced it with news reports. Titanium Ledger was the parent company for Matthew's revolutionary crypto exchange, the one that had quietly imploded 6 months ago. The feds hadn't charged him yet, but the investors were suing. I traced the dates. The transfers from my parents coincided exactly with Matthew's margin calls. They hadn't just invested in him. They had liquidated their future to cover his losses. And then, the smoking gun. A withdrawal of $1.2 million from Grandpa Silas's estate account. 3 days before he died. The signature was shaky. It looked like Silas's, but the timestamp on the digital authorization was from an IP address in Matthew's apartment. My blood ran cold. Matthew hadn't just failed. He had embezzled. He had stolen from our dying grandfather to plug the hole in his Ponzi scheme. And my parents. They knew. They had to know. They weren't suing me because they thought I was crazy. They were suing me because I was the only solvent thing left. They needed my inheritance to pay back the estate before the probate court audited the accounts and found the missing $1 million. They were cannibalizing their competent child to save their golden parasite. I closed the laptop. The sun was coming up, painting the room in gray light. I looked at the portraits on the wall. Ancestors who had built something real. And now, this generation, rotting from the inside out. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting a crime scene. 72 hours later, I walked into the courtroom. The air was stale. Recycled. Smelling of floor wax and anxiety. Mr. Vance stood up as the judge entered. Judge Holloway. A stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked at the petition. Then at the parties. This is a petition for emergency conservatorship over Haley Reed, filed by Gregory and Sandra Reed. She read, her voice flat, alleging incapacity due to severe paranoia and fiscal irresponsibility. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. It was a perfect performance. The grieving mother, forced to take control of her wayward daughter. My father put a comforting arm around her. Matthew checked his watch, looking bored, as if this was just a formality before the wire transfer hit his account. Does the respondent have counsel? Judge Holloway asked, looking at the empty chair next to me. Or are you requesting a continuance to find representation? The silence stretched. The air conditioning hummed. A low, mechanical drone. Mr. Vance smirked. He expected me to stammer, to cry, to ask for time. He expected the girl from the attic. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my thrift store suit. Your Honor, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. I am counsel of record. I walked to the bench and placed my Bar Association card on the judge's desk. Haley Silas Reed, admitted to the Massachusetts bar 6 months ago. The shockwave hit the room physically. Matthew stopped scrolling. His phone clattered to the table. Mr. Vance froze, his mouth half open. My father's face went slack, the color draining out of it, until he looked like gray putty. My mother stopped dabbing her eyes and stared at me. Truly stared at me. For the first time in years. I see, Judge Holloway said, examining the card. A small smile touched her lips. Proceed, Counselor. I walked back to my table and opened the red folder. Your Honor, the petitioners claim I am incompetent. They claim my frugality is a mental illness. I submit that my frugality was a necessity, as I was funding my own legal education while living in a hostile environment. I pulled out a document. I present Exhibit A, the last will and testament of Silas Reed. Specifically, the clause on page 14, the poison pill provision. I read it aloud, looking directly at my father. Any beneficiary who initiates legal action to question the competency or challenge the inheritance of another beneficiary, without the submission of 2 independent psychiatric evaluations, shall immediately forfeit their entire share of the estate. Said forfeited share shall be redistributed to the remaining beneficiaries. Mr. Vance scrambled through his papers. We were not aware of this clause. It was in the addendum Grandpa Silas filed the week before he died. I said. He knew you would come for me. This is a medical concern, Vance sputtered. We are trying to help her. Is it? I asked. I opened the blue folder. Or is it a cover-up? I pulled out the forensic accounting report, the spreadsheet with the IP addresses, the transfers to Titanium Ledger. Your Honor, I present evidence that the petitioners are not motivated by medical concern, but by financial desperation. I have documented proof that Matthew Reed embezzled $1.2 million from the estate prior to the testator's death, and that Gregory and Sandra Reed facilitated the cover-up. I handed the thick stack of papers to the bailiff. This petition is not a protective measure. It is predatory litigation designed to seize my assets to repay the funds stolen by the petitioners. It is an abuse of this court, and it is a felony. The judge flipped through the pages. Her face grew darker with every line. She looked up at my parents. They were shrinking, physically shrinking. My father was slumped over. My mother was shaking her head, whispering, "No. No to no one." Matthew looked like he was about to vomit. "Mr. Vance," Judge Holloway said, her voice like a guillotine. "Do you have a response to these allegations of fraud and embezzlement?" Vance looked at the documents. He looked at his clients. He closed his briefcase. "Your Honor," he said, stepping away from the table, "I must request a recess to confer with my clients regarding potential criminal exposure. I was not made aware of these financial details." He was abandoning ship. "Denied," Judge Holloway said. "I've seen enough." She looked at my family. The disgust in her eyes was palpable. "The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am upholding the forfeiture clause. Gregory, Sandra, and Matthew Reed have forfeited their shares of the estate, the house, the stipends, the remaining assets. They all revert to the sole remaining beneficiary, Haley Reed." She banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. "I am also referring this evidence to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into elder abuse and grand larceny. Court is adjourned." My mother let out a wail that echoed off the high ceilings. My father put his head in his hands. Matthew just sat there, staring at the handcuffs on the bailiff's belt, knowing they were coming for him soon. I packed my folders. Red, blue, black. I didn't look at them. I walked down the aisle. My mother grabbed my arm as I passed. Her grip was desperate, claw-like. "Haley, please, we're family, you can't do this. We'll lose the house, we'll lose everything." I stopped. I looked at her hand on my cheap suit sleeve. "You chose your family," I said, my voice ice cold. "And you chose poorly." I pulled my arm free and walked out the heavy oak doors into the bright, blinding sun of the Boston street. 6 months later, the Victorian mansion on Beacon Hill was sold at auction. It went for under market value to pay off the 3 mortgages. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Revere. My father works as a greeter at a hardware store. My mother doesn't leave the house. Matthew was indicted. He's currently out on bail, awaiting trial for wire fraud and embezzlement. He works the night shift at a warehouse. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't buy a penthouse. I rented a modest office space in downtown Boston. Brick walls, big windows, warm light. On the wall behind my desk, I hung a portrait of Grandpa Silas. I used the $2.5 million to seed a new legal defense fund, the Silas Project. We provide free legal representation to victims of financial abuse, coercive control, and predatory conservatorships. We help the shadows fight the suns. I stood by the window, watching the city move below me. I wasn't the girl in the attic anymore. I wasn't the shadow. I was the architect of my own life. I didn't just survive the fire they set. I became the water that puts it out for others. If you had held the power in that courtroom, would you have shown mercy? Or would you have enforced the clause? Let me know in the comments. And if this story made you feel seen, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started.